Level 1-2. Nolan. Nolan hadn't slept in 3 days. A new record, he thought to himself. 3 whole days without sleep. Nolan had been a turnkey down at Ogre Dungeon for over 6 years, and considering he worked every single day in a place filled with hundreds and hundreds of creatures that wanted to kill him, some sleepless nights would be expected. Some sleepless nights. Maybe even an occasional twosy, but 3? This was a whole new animal. Nolan wondered if it had anything to do with Garland Macmillan. As if I don't already have enough problems, he said to himself. Still, he made the most of it. Not one to wait in bed for a sleep that would never, ever come. Nolan had drawn a chalk circle on his parlor floor, lit some special candles that glowed green, and he meditated the night away, sitting poised, completely undisturbed. Save for that damn fox that insistently sat on his lap. "No, Swifty, no!" he yelled. "Get off my damn lap!" Swifty. That was the fox's name. Swifty was the only creature in 4 years to have beaten Nolan utterly and completely. He had gone from being that wretched fox that somehow found his way back inside again and again into Nolan's house and onto his couch to Swifty, the wretched pet Nolan purchased pet food for, a collar, and a pet bed. Though obviously, Swifty was not interested in any pet bed. "No, Swifty," Nolan yelled. "No fun, damn it! I'm trying to meditate." But there would be no peace in the way things were going. Maybe not ever again. Ogre Dungeon would be receiving custody of the one and only Garland Macmillan today. Macmillan, Nolan said to himself. Nolan looked up at his parlor walls, and where there weren't any bookshelves or pin-ups of legendary Linus, there were newspaper clipping after clipping of a certain famous, now infamous elf that probably didn't belong on his walls anymore. Though all of Nolan's windows were covered with burgundy shades, the crows of the neighborhood roosters told him it was now dawn. Not a wink, Nolan thought to himself as he pinched out candles between his fingers, and then the whole parlor went dark. From his sitting position, Nolan flopped back onto his backside into a corpse position. His head thudded against the floor, and a startled Swifty ran away. The parlor floor felt cooling on his naked backside. Now he could sleep if he wanted to, sleep forever, but it was time for work. It was time to go back in the dungeon. Nolan said goodbye to the ideas of sleep, the ideas of slumber. He flipped himself up onto his cool floor into a handstand position, where he proceeded to bust out 50 upside-down push-ups. Some elves like to spot a T to get their morning going. Nolan preferred upside-down push-ups, because he was not weak. He pushed out number 50, letting out a noise as either a grrr or a grunt. Then he floated on over to the kitchenette. Not literally, mind you. Nolan had no magic of any kind. He was just so damn tired he could not even feel his feet touch the ground. His kitchenette was, as you expect it to be, filthy. Stacks of dirty dishes, open cupboards, a fat wounded flour bag bleeding white powder all over the kitchenette floor, and the permanent smell of rotten chicken wafted everywhere. Nolan lit the oven fires and tossed 3 eggs onto his iron skillet to cook, while he cleaned himself out a plate and some cutlery for the morning meal. He slapped the eggs between 2 pieces of crusted laminus and scarfed it all down in 3 bites as he descended down his basement stairs to his wash basin. He was far too tired to wash up, but he made the effort to shave because, though Nolan may be considered far from elf-like, Nolan considered himself even farther from dwarf-like, and he would never tolerate whiskers on his face. Having finished shaving, Nolan became dismayed upon noticing that a stranger was staring at him from the other side of the mirror. For a moment he didn't recognize himself. It wasn't from the lack of sleep, mind you, so much as the scar across his face. And even after 4 years, he somehow forgot he had it. One big slice across his face at a near-perfect 45-degree angle. "You damn fool," he told himself. Nolan had once been proud of his scar. He had always been far too pretty for his liking, far too pretty to work in a dungeon. But now, seeing it, not looking at it, but seeing it, now Nolan saw his scar, and for once he wished to Fonda Almighty he had never set foot in that awful place. You can't change what has already happened. For a moment, Nolan wanted to punch the mirror into pieces, scream, curse, tear his whole house apart, but he didn't do any of that. He simply changed into his uniform, loaded his bokken, that's a wooden sword, onto his belt, opened the door, and let the fox out to hunt. The sun hurt his eyes, and even the skin below his eyelids burned, but he was outside now, and there'd be no going back in. He stumbled downhill, down Ciner Street, where all his happy-faced neighbors went about their happy-face routines, feeding chickens and backyard piggies. Some collected milk from the milk elf. Others picked up the morning copy of the Herald from the Steiner Street Newsy paper boy. Nolan hated them. As far as Nolan was concerned, they were all a bunch of liars and cheats with their lunar shine and their backdoor money-making games, their lying to the tax man, their adultery, their filth. Do you know the difference between a creature locked up and a creature outside, Nolan? Sharperton had once asked him. No, Nolan had said. The difference is the creature that gets locked up is the one that got caught. Meaning, according to Nolan, Sharperton, and everyone working inside Ogre Dungeon, everyone was a criminal, and it frustrated them to no end that they couldn't do anything about the ones on the outside. Only the ones on the inside. Assholes, Nolan said to himself. Have a nice day, Nolan, dared the milk elf crossing his path. Don't tell me what to do, Nolan shouted without turning his head. Nolan may have hated every elf, lady, and child on Steiner Street, and every creature in Ogre Dungeon, but he would always have a special hatred, above all creatures, for Constable Jeff! Nolan screamed, and there Jeff was. As far as Turnkey Sergeant Nolan was concerned, Jeff had to be the worst constable in all of Autumn's history, or at least the most untrustworthy, the most backstabbing. You don't look like a cop, you look like a librarian, Nolan would often tell him. What are you patrolling the streets of Jova for, Overdue library books? Jeff was far too nice to be a constable. He wouldn't last long in Ogre Dungeon, Nolan was sure of that, but the other constables knocked Jeff around a little, and Nolan didn't like that. For reasons he would later regret, he took it upon himself to help the kid out a little, teach him about fiends, teach him how to properly deal with blue shirts, deal with assholes, and for Fonda's sake, get the kid to do some push-ups. Jeff turned out to be a fast learner, and he rose up the constable ladder even faster. Constable Jeff was getting his face in the papers, and before you could blink an eye, he had already made sergeant. In 3 years' time, he had set a record for fastest to make lieutenant rank. Thanks to Nolan, Jeff had become Captain Prime's right-hand man, now put in a position where he could appoint his own constables. And Jeff thought he knew exactly who would make the best constable in all of Autumn. Jeff had never been more wrong in his life. Nolan had slammed the dishes down into his sink, shattering them in a million pieces. Get out, Jeff, Nolan had said. Out of my house. Now! Jeff was left near speechless. I thought you'd be happy, Nolan. Happy? As what, your little underling? You think being a constable is better than a turnkey? You think you're better than me? Is that it, Jeff? No, Jeff stammered, not at all. I want to get you out, Nolan. Out of where? Out of that miserable hole in the ground. Nolan, take the job, please. Are you blind? That place is killing you. I said get out! Nolan had screamed, slamming his fist into Constable Lieutenant's four-eyed face. Jeff! There Jeff was, right in front of him, just as he'd been a week ago, with his two constable cronies, Vix and Wedge, over by Big Belmonte's house, apparently surrounding a little boy, cuddling his arms around a big red ball for dear life. Vix and Wedge looked scared as Nolan approached. Jeff didn't look scared at all. Jeff looked pissed. But considering he was still sporting one hell of a shiner, and his glasses were still bound up with tape, Nolan had a pretty good idea why. I thought I told you to stay away from my house, Jeff. I'm not anywhere near your house, Nolan. I thought I told you to stay away from Steiner Street. You never told me that. I'm telling you now, Jeff. Stay away from Steiner Street. Get the hell out of here. Fix and Wedge looked at each other, and then back at Jeff. Jeff took in a breath. I'm going to where I damn well please, Nolan. Don't obstruct me. Nolan took out his boken. I'm obstructing you, Jeff. Leave the kid alone and stay off my street. We caught the kid red-handed, screamed Vix. Yeah, Wedge said. We caught him sneaking out of Big Belmonte's window. That was probably him just fetching his ball, right, kid? Nolan said. The scared little kid nodded frantically. Jeff drew out his sword. Rarely in his career had he taken out for anything, but he was done playing these games. At the sight of it, Nolan's head began to feel fuzzy, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was dreaming or awake. For a moment, he wasn't even fully sure what was going on, and you would... I'm not playing these games with you anymore, Nolan. I'm a constable, damn it! Leave immediately, or I swear I'll drag you down to the station myself. Do you hear me? Nolan didn't know what to say. Stay out of constable business, Nolan. What are you? Nolan began to wobble, and his stomach began to feel black. His heart began to race. What are you going to do with the kid, huh? Dungeon, whispered a voice. They're going to throw him in the dungeon. Nolan's eyes went red. His grip tightened around his boken. You're going to throw him in the dungeon, Jeff? He's just a kid. Jeff looked really confused. I didn't see anything like that, Nolan. Have you gone? You're nothing but a little bastard, Nolan, and I'm going to slam your face right in the mud. No! Nolan spread. No what, Nolan? Jeff yelled back. No, Jeff, I won't let you do that. Nolan began to tremble. Right in the mud, you little bastard. No! Nolan let out a scream that would make a werewolf pause, and before Jeff, Vix, or Wedge could even blink or shake a sword, all three of them were unconscious in a pile. Get away from me, Jeff! Don't touch me! Soon, Nolan's head started to calm down, and his head started to clear. Nolan thought to himself, oh, I haven't slept in 3 days. He thought he was back in his parlor, but he wasn't. Nolan looked around, and his eyes nearly popped out of his skull. Someone had knocked out 3 constables, and reduced a small elf boy to tears. Please, mister, please, the little boy begged. Please don't hurt them anymore. I am a thief, see? And the boy unzipped a secret zipper on his big red ball, and out fell some silver forks, some rupees, and 1 gold watch. I'm a bad boy, mister. I'm very bad. You're not a bad kid, said Nolan, now fully awake again. He put his boken back on his belt and began to walk away. Trust me, there are creatures far worse than you. Though, as Nolan looked at his once friend Jeff, he couldn't think of anything worse than himself.